Us, but in the interest of time, we'll get started.
Sure.
So, happy to have Christian Swartzbaugh here for our seminar tonight. And you can see the title, Fish Out of Water, Research, Rescue, and the Race to Save the Laurel Dace. Christian is a PhD student over at the Odum School of Ecology, working with Krista Capps.
Yep,
as your
and
major professor.
I am co-advised by Dr. Krista Capps and Stacy Lance at
Stacey
SREL.
Yeah. And I think some of this work that you're talking about was project that you were involved with when you were at the Tennessee Aquarium?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to hear about this, and I'm happy to have you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to talk about this with you guys tonight. So when Alfie reached out and told me a little bit about what the environmental ethics certificate program was, I just thought this was, the perfect place for you guys to hear about some of the work that's going on just north of us in Chattanooga. And so what you're going to see today is in part of a dissertation chapter that will eventually make its way into what I'm doing looking at minnow behavior, but I also wanted to incorporate all the aspects of the work that's being done to save the Laurel Dace, because as you all probably know, conservation is a multidisciplinary field that requires diverse stakeholders and interests to all kind of coalesce to actually accomplish these goals. And so with that, I realize that a lot of you here probably aren't fish heads and thinking about freshwater ecology in the way that I always do, so I wanted to open this up with a little classroom participation just to kind of get an idea of your knowledge base for some of this. So when I say local freshwater animals, what do you think of? You can shout them out, I'll hear anything. Fish, very good. What else? Frogs, excellent. Salamanders, good. Fish, frogs, salamanders. These are all correct answers. So I'm imagining if I were to ask you this and you conjured something in your mind, it would look something like this. And these are all examples of freshwater fish that we can probably find in our backyard. We have crappie and bass and sunfish, and maybe if you're interested in fishing, you know about catfish. And if you've ever been to the Odum School of Ecology, you've probably seen the turtles in the turtle pond. And if you're like me and you like flipping rocks and logs in the stream and you did that as a kid, maybe you even thought of crayfish. And while these are all great examples of freshwater organisms that live around us, the reality is that this only represents a tiny fraction of the biodiversity that we have in our backyards in the southeastern United States. And even this slide up here represents a very tiny fraction of the form, the function, the color that we can see in our backyards. And so we have fish, turtles, we have freshwater mussels, and giant salamanders. I mean, we really are in a regional hotspot for biodiversity. And some of the work that's been done to look at this has uncovered the fact that despite covering less than 1% of the Earth's surface, freshwaters account for nearly 1/3 of all vertebrate species and 10% of all species. So this is a really big area of concern for conservationists, and we need to plan accordingly when conserving this disproportionate space in terms of the biodiversity that's there. And so as I mentioned, we are actually in a hotspot of biodiversity, and this is really evident if you look at this map that was actually produced in collaboration with some scientists at the University of Georgia and the Tennessee Aquarium of fish diversity. And you can see our star kind of representing where Athens is. If you head just north up into the Conasauga, especially, that's this bright red, reddish orange spot right here, you'll see some beautiful, beautiful species of fish and mussels and salamanders, all the things you named, but so much more. And even just in Georgia, we have 265 species of native freshwater fish. That's really big, and we're not even the most diverse. So Alabama and Tennessee have more than us. And of those 265, around 20 are undescribed. So we're still learning about the biodiversity that's present in our backyards. And not only that, but 5 are endemic, meaning that they're only found in Georgia. And so this is really cool. If you're from Georgia, if you're from the Southeast, this is your heritage. And it's a special thing to be able to engage with this at such an intimate level and actually be able to protect it, because this is ultimately, what we have to show for that. And so not only are we in a regional biodiversity hotspot, we're in a global biodiversity hotspot too. So you can see from the colors up here that the red that's represented up in the southeast, we throw our weight around just as well as some places that you probably are familiar with when you think more about biodiversity. You think about the Amazon in South America, or the Congo in Africa, or the Mekong River out in Asia. And so as you can see, we are equally as important when it comes to this freshwater diversity. And this map kind of drives that point home in a different form and kind of transitions us into what we're going to be talking about tonight. And what the basic takeaway from this map is species richness of unprotected land. So the redder the land is, the more species are there that are in need of protection. They are all at high risk. And as you can see, there's a lot of red in the southeast, meaning that there's a lot of land that these endemic animals live on, but that we don't protect currently. And so that can lead to a bunch of challenges in conservation. Now, there we go. Back to our fish map here. So as I mentioned, we have a ton of fish in the southeast, and I'm going to be talking today mainly about a fish that's found in Tennessee. But to give you a broader idea of what we're talking about, it's minnows, which are one of the most diverse families of fish in the southeast, with over 290 species. And even in just this family, you can see there's a lot of diversity in form and function and color. And so they are spread out throughout the United States. But the one we are going to be talking about tonight is this fish here, the subject of our talk and my personal muse, the Laurel Dace, Chrysoma sailori. This was a photo taken by someone at the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute. And so the Laurel Dace is a focus of conservation efforts for TNASI. That's the abbreviation that I'll probably be using to describe the Conservation Institute. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a problem that requires diverse solutions. And so we can't just be saving the fish just with research. We have to use outreach, partnerships, and research in collaboration and combination to successfully protect this fish. And so just to give a little bit of background, the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute is located in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It is associated with the aquarium, but it is a separate building out here. And their main focus is to protect imperiled southeastern biodiversity. And that includes fish, that includes mussels, amphibians, invertebrates. They're really focused on a holistic approach to conservation. And I had the fortune of being able to work there for about 16 months on a project specifically looking at the behavior of the Laurel Dace that I'm going to tell you about tonight. But I wanted to start by giving a little background to kind of set the stage for where we are. So as I mentioned, not only is the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute in Chattanooga, but the Laurel Dace lives in Chattanooga's backyard up on the Walden Ridge, which is part of the Cumberland Plateau. This fish was originally found in 8 streams in the wild, but is now relegated to 2. And to give you an idea, this map was created somewhat recently, and the green streams indicate where we've found the fish, but even that has disappeared. So we've lost 1 stream up here. They're now only found in 2 streams in the wild. And so those 2 streams actually represent 2 separate populations of fish, which I'm going to talk about what that means a little bit later. But it's important to know that while these fish are the same species, they are genetically different from each other. And they typically live in these high elevation streams on the Cumberland Plateau that are primarily dominated by this bedrock substrate and boulders and this gravel. And you don't want a lot of this gravel in these streams, but this is really important for this fish's life history because they actually breed in this gravel. So they're spawning over this, they lay their eggs, the eggs drop down into the water and, onto the surface of the substrate, and that offers them some protection from predators because there are a lot of macroinvertebrates and there are a lot of salamanders that we're talking about that are in the system that may want to eat those Laurel Dace eggs. But luckily, if the gravel's there, that usually offers some amount of protection. And if you'll notice, another good indicator of good habitat quality are the mountain laurel, which is where this fish gets its name from, that are surrounding the streams. There's a lot of canopy cover that's really important in keeping the temperature in an appropriate range for this fish. And so this is one of the streams that the Laurel Dace is currently found in. This is called Bumby Creek, and I'll be talking about Bumby Creek a little bit later as well. The other stream doesn't look so good, and this is Young's Creek. So this is another population of fish, and as you can see, this just right off the bat, there's some big differences here. And one of the most important ones to the health of the Laurel Dace is this abundance of silt. Now, if you were to go to this stream 15, 20 years ago, it would actually look like Bumby Creek, but there is bedrock, there are boulders, there is the appropriate habitat there, but it's buried under about 4 to 6 feet of sediment. So this is a lot of sediment that's been moved in from the surrounding area. And as you can see, it still has a decent riparian zone with plants surrounding on the sides, but the reality is that there's a lot of farming going on up on the Cumberland Plateau, which is impacting the streams. And so as I mentioned before, the silt impacts the Laurel Dace in kind of two ways. One is it chokes out that breeding habitat, those gravel nests that are super important for this fish. And it also impacts their food source because this is not ideal habitat for a lot of the little bugs and macroinvertebrates that the Laurel Dace likes to eat. So this poses a challenge to recover this fish. If we ever wanted to reintroduce it to the wild, we need a habitat that's good enough to support this fish. And what's actually happening right now, again, I'll touch on this a little later, is that this fish is declining pretty rapidly. And in a recent survey of a little over half a mile of this stream, they found one Laurel Dace. So this fish is really not doing so well in Young's Creek. And so as I mentioned, some of the main threats to the Laurel Dace include these practices of land use on the Cumberland Plateau, which is primarily dominated by tomato farms and pepper farms. And when farmers farm in specific ways, a lot of that sediment can run off, if it's not properly contained, into the stream. Not only that, they're actually letting their cattle and other animals graze, in the stream that the Laurel Dace used to be found in. So that's why it's extirpated from some of those streams you saw. And then importantly, there's a lot of invasive fish in this system too. So the green sunfish, which you see up here in the net, and I'm going to talk about its biology a little bit more later, is invasive, but it's a popular sport fish. And a lot of farmers like to stock their farm ponds with these fish that they can go out and catch. And that is all well and good until those fish get washed off in a flood and then end up in the stream. And unlike a lot of other sunfish like bluegill and spotted sunfish that you might be familiar with catching in different ponds that typically have really small mouths, the green sunfish has a really, really big mouth, and it's more like a bass. They're all in the same family, the bass family, and is really good at eating Laurel Dace. So this poses an additional problem. A unique issue for this fish too is something called the yellow grub. So this is actually a parasitic trematode that infects the Laurel Dace. And to give you just a basic background of parasite biology, if you're not familiar, this is a animal with a really interesting life cycle. So it starts as these free-swimming larvae in a pond that then find a snail and actually burrow into the flesh of the snail and then grow in the snail to their next life stage. So they kind of become almost like from a little pupa to a little cat. You can think almost like a caterpillar, this like intermediate stage. And then once they've reached that, they exit the snail and then they find a fish to encysted in. And so that's what we're actually seeing here in this Laurel Dace. So these are encysted, they're called metacercaria. And they stay in this fish until they encounter the proper push that gets them out of this cyst. And the only thing that we know of right now that actually causes them to pop out of this cyst is the digestive enzymes of wading birds. So that's why this heron is involved in this process too. So this trematode is three, we call it a triphasic life cycle. It has 3 phases. So it starts in the water, into a snail, into a fish, and then when the fish is eaten by a wading bird, the digestive juices kind of break apart that cyst, and then the adult flukes then enter back into the pond. And so an interesting aspect of this ecology is that we don't know whether the Laurel Dace is actually a typical host for the yellow grub. And this kind of causes a problem too, because we're not even sure that the yellow grub is even completing its life cycle in the birds, because as I mentioned before, there's a lot of canopy cover on those streams. And so we're not seeing a lot of herons or egrets and maybe even kingfishers in those streams. So what we think is happening is that the yellow grub is actually being washed in, again, from those farm ponds, the same ones that the green sunfish is in, and then infecting the Laurel Dace through snails that are also being washed in from storm flows. The problem with this, you can think that, okay, well, this is good because then the Laurel Dace isn't being eaten by a heron, but if you were to walk around with a bunch of baseballs under your skin, you would probably feel a little uncomfortable, and you'd probably be acting differently, and you probably wouldn't be able to engage in life the way you might want to. And so that's one thing that we're looking at with the Laurel Dace, is how their behavior is affected by being encysted by this yellow grub. And if that weren't enough, there's, of course, another thing that a lot of areas in the Southeast are dealing with right now, and that's drought. So when I was actually going out to conducting some of my research, I ended up going to a stream, looking for some fish, and finding this right here. And usually this is a flowing stream with water. All those rocks are typically underwater. And this was in the summer of 2024. And what happened is that this intense drought hit the Southeast. And so we got some down here in Athens, but while I was living in Chattanooga, it was really, really bad. And all those little headwater streams that are up on the mountain are usually the first to go. They don't have a lot of water in them. And if they're not spring-fed in any way that's that's providing enough water, then they're going to draw down and eventually dry up completely. And unfortunately, that was what we encountered up on the streams. And to give you an idea, this is Bumby Creek again, and this is a road crossing that we typically find a lot of little fish. So the Laurel Dace love to hang out in this pool right here. They like this somewhat deeper water. That's where they're finding their food. That's sometimes where they're spawning. And in June, we have a pretty good looking stream. There's decent connectivity, decent flow. And then in July, it started to get a little worse. And you can see not only did the water draw down, we're losing a lot of that flow. There's also an increased sedimentation. Anything that's happening in the stream is stirring up sediment. That's not great either. These fish don't like that. It doesn't help with their biology and the way they interact with the environment. It's preventing them from seeing and locating their food. It's preventing them from finding each other effectively. And this is not good. And then it got even worse. So in September, this is the exact same spot. And you can see that there is absolutely no flow connecting these pools, and it's even hard to tell that there is just a little bit of water in this pool right here. And the same thing happened in that other creek that I talked about, Young's Creek. So here's Young's Creek in June, here's Young's Creek in July, and here's Young's Creek in September, all in this same area. And so again, this is a really dire threat for this fish, because unlike birds and mammals and other animals, they can't just get up and walk away and go to someplace else to find a new home. They are only in these two streams. So this posed a real issue. And there were a few ways that we ended up dealing with this. And one of them is that we wanted to understand more about how these droughts are affecting fish on the Cumberland Plateau. And the first way to do that is to understand what's driving the droughts and the flow patterns. And so we actually reached out to some people at the USGS that developed this really cool program called Flow Photo Explorer. And this is a free software, and they're actually really excited to get more people invested in using this software. So if you're interested, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about this afterwards, or I can point you in the direction to reach out to people. But basically what it does is you can take a trail camera, and you can either connect it to the internet to have constant feedback, or you can just go and upload pictures from it. And what it does is takes pictures of a stream, you position it at one point, and allow it to take continuous pictures. And then you have a human train an AI on about 1,000 or so images. And all you have to do is say, okay, this has more water, this has less water. And eventually, using a deep learning model and some basic parameters that you give it in the beginning, it allows you to constantly monitor flow. And so this is really useful, because both Bumby and Young's Creek are about a little more than an hour away from Tanasi, from the Conservation Institute. So it's not really conducive for us to drive up every day or even every week and check this out. But this provides a great opportunity for us to be constantly monitoring flows and checking to see whether more action needs to be taken to protect this animal. And to that end, I thought I'd show you a video to show the other aspect of what we had to do, because while this is really useful for monitoring the future, we needed to do something right when in the moment. So here, I'm going to bring up a video on YouTube to let, whoa.
And my passion is to alleviate arthritis pain using nothing but natural methods. Can you guess the top three?
To let Dr. Anna George, the Vice President of Conservation and Education at the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute, tell you a little bit more about how we spent our July in 2024.
go and save the Laurel Dace from this stream was not a decision that we took lightly. Because of how few of these individuals are left in the wild, each individual has so much importance. No member of our crew took that lightly. When we got to the site on the day of the rescue, I was pretty shocked by how much it had changed within about a month since I had last seen it. The pools were all very disconnected from each other. There was no flow between any of those pools, and you could tell that the water had been stagnant for quite a while. And so I was definitely concerned, and I was really thankful that we had chosen to take action when we did.
When we saw the conditions that the Laurel Dace were living in, we were not comfortable leaving an extremely endangered species to try to survive this event on its own. We consulted with our partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and collectively this group made a decision that it was time to rescue the Laurel Dace from the drought. This is not a decision that's ever made lightly. It's extremely alarming when you're a conservation biologist because you're working with these critically endangered species, which is kind of like having a patient who's in the ICU. You have to really carefully weigh out the risks of leaving this species to try to survive this event on its own in the wild versus giving them a helping hand and bringing them back into human care, but exposing them to some different risks. We knew that it was likely until about November where we would see significant rainfall back in these streams. What really weighs heavily on us is knowing that how critically endangered the Laurel Dace is means that inaction could have led to the permanent extinction of this species.
Because the conditions in the wild were so dire for these fish, we had concerns that some of the individuals would not survive transport back to Tennessee, and we were prepared to handle that. Remarkably, we did not lose any individuals during transport back to Tennessee. The success of the fish is really a testament to the expertise that we have here taking care of those individuals. And so now the Laurel Dace are doing great. They almost seemed relieved to have, fresh, clean water and plentiful food sources that they probably weren't getting in the wild during the drought. We're hoping that by November it has rained enough that those streams have connected pools with good flow and good oxygen that will allow us to be comfortable putting the Laurel Dace back into their wild home. As a recovery biologist, I work pretty strictly with threatened and endangered and imperiled fishes, and there can sometimes be this hopelessness that surrounds my job where it feels like all of these species are at risk and it all feels big and heavy. But in order to kind of thrive in this job, you have to be the eternal optimist. Days like the day when we get to bring the Laurel Dace back to the stream are the days that kind of keep us going. We get to actually bring this fish back and feel the success of actually saving this fish from something that could have caused the extinction of it, and we get to feel the joy that comes to us from releasing them successfully back into the wild and saving them for another year.
So, we rescued a fish.
Speak any language at the touch of a button.
That kind of gave a good overview of the kind of quick planning that went into this rescue. And I think one of the best analogies that was mentioned in this video is a patient in the ICU. And so I thought I'd show you a little bit of what the ICU looks like. I think you saw some of that in the video as well. But we had two systems set up in the basement of Tennessee. They are well equipped to deal with these types of situations, which just makes it really, really good and them a powerful resource for conservation. But we separated the fish out into their two populations, so the Bumby and Youngs Creek fish. The Youngs Creek ones are the ones that are more infected with the yellow grub, so we wanted to separate them for a few reasons to just make sure that there wasn't any spreading just in the instance that we didn't fully understand that parasite's biology, and in some way it might have jumped ship to the Bumby Creek fish. And luckily in November, the rains came back and the flow in the stream returned, but we only put back some of the fish. And so we wanted to make sure that we had some perpetuity for the situation. And so some of the fish remain to this day at Tanasi and are in what's called an ARC population. That's why I have this up here. And that does come from this biblical term of saving species and bringing, 2 of each animal. And so what we have are 2 populations, that is a coincidence, but of Laurel Dace, that some fish will remain in human care at Tanasi for forever. And the idea is if this fish ever were to blink out in the wild and some dramatic event happened, another drought or potentially a pollution event with chemical spills, we would safeguard this species from extinction in the long term. Now, some of the fish, as I said, did go back. And actually one of the more exciting things that we did, if you look up in the top left here, you'll see a juvenile Laurel Dace. And we actually were able to breed them in human care. So these fish, now we know the methods used for breeding them and for keeping this population going. So we have a way to continue this into the future. And the goal eventually will be to reintroduce this fish back into the wild. But as I said, a lot of that habitat is not good right now. And so we need to get the habitat to a point where we feel safe and comfortable releasing them back out. So as I mentioned, there are a bunch of things that go into successfully protecting an endangered species, and one of those is partnerships. And this is the area that I personally was least involved in, but I wanted to give you an idea of the types of actions that are being taken to conserve this little 2-inch fish. And so the biggest action here is this Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which is a mini farm bill program sponsored through the USDA that is called Ridges to Rivers. And I won't make you read all of that. You're welcome to if you'd like. But the general idea of Ridges to Rivers is to protect and restore the water quality on the Cumberland Plateau, both for the conservation of these imperiled aquatic animals and their habitats, but also using best practices that help with human management or management of human resources, like those farms that are still critical to the economy of the Cumberland Plateau. And as you can see, these 3 counties in southeastern Tennessee were divided up into priority areas. And as you can see, the priority 1, this dark red color, represents the areas that are of most importance to maintain. And so Bumby Creek and Youngs Creek are here. And you can see that even above them on the plateau, we really need to make sure that the habitat is good, because everything that happens up there is going to end up in those streams. So if you are protecting the farm fields, if you're protecting that kind of stuff, then you're hopefully protecting the Laurel Dace. And so the Ridges to Rivers includes $10 million of funding over 5 years that's specifically going to landowners that are interested in improving their land management practices. And so there are a bunch of ways that we do this. Some of them are by directly reaching out and doing house calls, basically going up and knocking on doors and saying, hey, we're with the Tennessee Aquarium and we're interested in protecting this land. Would you be interested in talking more about some of the practices? And it's about engaging, I think, landowners in a way that does not put any blame on them for the practices they're doing, but shows different ways that we can kind of work together to benefit everyone. And just to give you an idea of some of the partners that are involved in this, you can see that not only is the Tennessee Aquarium and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are there, but we have university partners like University of Tennessee Chattanooga, we have Tennessee Tech, and then state and nonprofit partners as well, the Tennessee Valley Authority, TWRA, Land Trust, 10 Green. These are all organizations that come together with this shared goal to save this little fish, which I think is really, really special, and it's kind of unique because this isn't an animal that's like the panda or the snow leopard that's really charismatic. We're talking about this small fish that most people will never see in person in their life, but it's still such an important aspect of southeastern biology. So it's neat to see all these people kind of coming around to help save this animal. And so one of the special ways that the Tennessee Aquarium has been involved in this is by reaching out through community dinners. So they're actually hosting these informal events where people can come and get information. And one of the unique things about this too is that they don't really mention the Laurel Dace at these dinners. So the point isn't to just say, hey, there's this endangered fish, because I think you'll get a lot of hesitancy if you go around telling people that they have a critically endangered fish in their backyard, because that leads to people being nervous about what they're allowed to do on their land, and they don't want to necessarily be told that they have to stop what they are already doing if they want to do that for personal or economic reasons. And so what these dinners focus on is just community engagement in understanding land use practices and what's going on in these neighborhoods on the Cumberland Plateau. And this is a really powerful way to reach people and indirectly benefit not only this fish, but its habitat and the other habitats that are surrounded there. So that's kind of all I'm going to say about partnerships at the moment. Again, this was probably the part that I was least involved in, but I don't want to understate how important this is to actually getting things done. I mean, this is where the money is. This is where the interaction with people really benefits the conservation practices that are going on. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about outreach, and this is kind of the fun thing and another way that we reach out to the people. And the Tennessee Aquarium has, in my personal opinion, some of the best outreach that I've seen locally for conservation. I mean, they really have it nailed down to a science, and part of that is getting involved in all kinds of different ways. And so I thought I'd show you some of those. One of those is actually going out into the community at big events and kind of showcasing what we have. And so this is me up in Laurel. So we have a new mascot that they actually created for the aquarium that is a Laurel Dace that got to walk in the Dayton Strawberry Festival parade. And I have to say, it was incredible to see not only the turnout, but the number of people. Dayton's about 45 minutes north of Chattanooga that knew so much about the Tennessee Aquarium, and people from all walks of life, all political backgrounds. And I know this just based on the hats and the shirts they were wearing, but they were just so excited and saying, oh, Tennessee Aquarium, Tennessee, we love you. And that really is a testament to the work that Tennessee and just the aquarium in general are doing in the community to promote conservation and to promote knowledge about the aquatic resources in their backyards. Additionally, so I want to highlight one particular employee at Tennessee, and that's this woman in the middle here holding this this paper. Her name is Helena Gomez, and she's one of the ones who's kind of in charge of a lot of the partnerships. She helped develop the RCPP and kind of works very intimately with landowners. But especially, she actually worked with the town of Spring City, which is just north of Dayton and right where the Laurel Dace is found, to designate May 17th as Laurel Dace Day. So this is now a holiday that is celebrated by the town. Which is incredibly special, and she got the Laurel Dace, worked with Spring City to make the Laurel Dace the town mascot. So this like group of people that probably wouldn't necessarily know that this little fish is hanging out in two streams in their backyard now have this intimate familiarity with this. And so we actually celebrated the first Laurel Dace Day earlier this year in 2025, and there were a few components to this. There was a 5K fun run. There was lots of vendors and exhibitors, both from the aquarium and from the partners involved. And as you can see here, this is the CEO of the Tennessee Aquarium with the mayor of Spring City. So we're forging connections between people. And so this was a really great way to introduce people. And the town itself had these banners that were hung up to let people know that this event was happening. They paired with a local brewery and created these fancy glasses that people could buy, and some of the proceeds would be donated to help save the Laurel Dace. As I mentioned, there was an actual race to save the Laurel Dace with over 330 registrants. There was a virtual option for participation, a 5K, and then a half-mile fun run to make sure everyone was able to participate. And some of the cool outcomes from this can be seen in how far we got to reach. So this is not the virtual presentation or the virtual participation. These are actually people who made it out to Laurel Dace Day. And I'm not necessarily sure that people came all the way from Washington State just to celebrate the Laurel Dace, but it's really cool to see how far the reach of this has gone. So we had people from the Northeast, from the West, from Miami, down in Florida, all coming up and taking part in this event. And so not only do they get to learn about the Laurel Dace, but they get to take that knowledge back home. And even if you don't live in the Southeast, they still have come away with a better understanding of the kinds of conservation questions that the Tennessee Aquarium is interested in, and just of this little fish that kind of hopefully people can appreciate, and it gives them a new I guess, a broader appreciation of freshwater biology in the Southeast. And that's evident here by this survey that was given both at the beginning and the end. And as you can see, anyone who signed up for the race was given this survey. And you can see at the beginning, not many people even know what the Laurel Dace is. And that's to be expected. This fish wasn't widely known, in the community before this. But afterwards, you can see this big shift. And now we see a lot of people are at least somewhat familiar or very familiar and extremely familiar with this fish and what it does and what it means. And so, as I said, this took place in Spring City, and the Laurel Dace lives only a few miles up the mountain from Spring City. And while we didn't get to do it this year, the future plans are to actually be able to bus people up to Bumby Creek and have them look at the fish, because that's a really special opportunity to actually put eyes on this animal. And I think it creates this unique connection between you and the habitat you're trying to conserve. So this is an overall resounding success, and it's really cool to see this. So if you're around and you want to go up to Spring City next year, Laurel Dace Day is going to be happening in perpetuity. So this is a really neat opportunity. And finally, I just wanted to touch on the fact of how much press that the Laurel Dace has gotten, and kind of outsized for the size fish it is. But to highlight a few things, the Weather Channel even did a feature up here on the Laurel Dace, and it's been featured in a bunch of local and regional newspapers and journals, and just showcasing both the research that's happening, the outreach, these partnerships, all coming together. So we're doing a pretty good job. The Tennessee Aquarium, again, as I said, is really, really good at outreach and reaching the right audience and telling them the right things to get people excited. So this is really encouraging to see that so many people are learning about the issues surrounding this fish. So finally tonight, I wanted to talk about what I specifically was brought up to Tenassi to do, and that's looking at research. And to give you just a very general background of what I'm interested in as a PhD student is positive biotic interactions. And so these are things like mutualisms, if you think about animals working together, where both animals or both species benefit. And while we don't usually think about positive biotic interactions in fresh waters, they are ubiquitous. They're found all over the place. So some cool examples of this are frugivorous fishes. So tambaqui or pacu are large South American fish that you might have seen in an aquarium that eat fruit that falls in the river, and they actually swim upstream, and when they migrate, they transport that fruit and they excrete it, and then the tree gets to grow in a new location. So the plant is now expanding its range, and the fish is getting a meal. And so that is a mutualism. Another example of this are caddisfly larvae. So the caddisfly is right here, and it actually spins this net. This was created by this little bug. And what happens with this is that it alters the flow and creates different microhabitats. So other organisms are now able to live there. And it's like a type of facilitation where you're modifying the habitat for other animals to live in. Or positive biotic interactions could be as simple as something like an aquatic plant that just happens to be flowing in the stream and, again, creates habitat for both animals to kind of live in, for protection from predators, or simply habitat like structure for little bugs to live on. And so they are ubiquitous in fresh waters. But the one that I am most interested in is mixed species groups. And while you may not be familiar with this term, I am absolutely certain that if you've ever had an interest in nature, you know what a mixed species group is. And this is probably the most famous example. So if you've ever seen a nature documentary on the BBC, Planet Earth, something like this, I'm sure they've shown you the Serengeti. And what's happening here are that, as the name implies, multiple species of animals are choosing to hang out together. And the reasons they do this are thought to kind of boil down to two ideas. One is to be able to locate predators, and the other is to acquire resources. And you could say, well, animals are going to do this anyway, but there might be unique benefits from animals that actually hang out together. And one of the ways that this can play out is to give an example on the Serengeti, is the different types of eyesight that animals have. So we have 3 different ungulates here. We have zebra, we have wildebeest, and we have a type of antelope. And this is not an exact showing of the types of eyesight that these animals have, but it gives you a general idea of the principle. So if you have one species that is kind of the way they're facing, they typically see up. That would allow them to look for things that, predators that are approaching from this angle, but they might not be able to see at a different angle. So then you have other animals that are going to locate food resources, and so they're going to hang out together to be able to find food in a quicker way. And then finally, you have animals that might look out in a third direction. And so when you combine all these together, you've now increased your ability to interact with the environment in a positive way. You're able to identify resources quicker and access them quicker, and again, locate and avoid predators more efficiently. And everything in nature is based around efficiency. You want to be able to do this in the best way possible and preserve yourself and those around you. So mixed species groups offer unique benefits that might be even better than being just hanging out in like a single school. Mixed species groups in aquatic systems are typically confined to coral reefs. So that's the other famous example. You see a lot of parrotfish and surgeonfish and tangs all hanging out together, and it's the same reason. They're swimming around the reef, locating resources. But this does happen in freshwaters, and so the most famous example of mixed species groups in freshwaters is probably this right here. And so you might be familiar with this. If you're not, this fish in the middle is called a river chub, Nocomis micropogon. And what it's actually doing is building a nest out of these stones. So it swims around the river and it picks up stones of similar sizes and deposits them and builds this giant nest. And this is a male that does this during the breeding season to attract a mate. But because these nests can be up to 2 feet or 3 feet wide and 2 feet high, these are really big structures in the stream. They attract a lot of attention, and that goes beyond the female chubs. And so what happens is other species of fish, like these saffron shiners right here, but there's over 30 species of fish that are known associates, all congregate over this nest. And this is really cool. I mean, this from like a small space in the stream, you create this entire community. And so this is a positive biotic interaction. It's an example of a mutualism because all of the fish are going to end up laying their eggs in this rock pile, essentially. And if a predator comes by, there's less chance that you specifically are going to be singled out in that instance. So if we all lay our eggs here, and a predator comes by, oh, maybe you get my egg this time, maybe the predator gets a different egg the next time. And so then every fish benefits. So this becomes this really crucial interaction that happens in the streams. And while this is probably the most studied example of this in freshwaters, and this happens in the southeast, we know that freshwater mixed species groups happen year-round. And so my personal interest as a PhD student is why this happens, because there is not a lot of evidence out there that tells us why minnows might like to hang out together, even though if you've ever stuck your head underwater, you see a lot of species doing that. And so to apply this to the Laurel Dace, I was wondering if we can harness the benefits of mixed species groups for conservation. So this is something we don't always think about animal behavior in terms of broad conservation application, but I think this represents a really unique opportunity to kind of combine these two fields. And so my thinking is that the Laurel Dace might benefit from the other minnow that it hangs out with. So as I mentioned, the Laurel Dace hangs out in these upland streams. You saw Bumby in Young's Creek, and there's usually only one other fish up there. It's called the Western Black-nosed Dace. It's a minnow that's about roughly the same size. And from snorkel observations that I have done and from snorkel observations that have been published in years past, people have noticed that the Laurel Dace seems to like to hang out with the Western Black-nosed Dace quite a bit. And so that kind of gets at my question of why might they want to do this. And so I was particularly interested in what benefits might happen if they hang out together, but also in the context of that invasive predator, that green sunfish that's now introduced, because that is not a fish that either of these fish have evolved to deal with. And suddenly they're presented with this new problem. So maybe that benefit of hanging out together and locating and avoiding predators becomes all the more important when you have this invasive predator in the system. However, as great as it would be to be able to just put these two fish together and see what happens, the Laurel Dace is a critically endangered fish, and so I don't really want to mess with it more than it is already being messed with naturally in the wild. So instead, I turned to a close relative of the Laurel Dace. This is the Tennessee dace. It's in the same genus, and it's a very similar species that we use as a proxy. And an ecological proxy is a species that usually has the same requirements that your focal individual does, and that lets us compare. So the conclusions we draw from what we learn about the proxy species can be applied to the focal fish, in this case the Laurel Dace. And so picked the Tennessee Dace because it has a lot of the similar requirements. So their habitats are very similar. This is the Laurel Dace stream. This is Young's Creek on the left. And this is a stream where I collected Tennessee Dace from the wild. Madden Branch, I believe, in Tennessee, on the right. And you can see they look very similar. They have a lot of bedrock. They have a lot of boulder. And this is good because these fish operate in similar habitats. So check, we have a good habitat match. We also have a good diet match. Both the Laurel Dace and the Tennessee Dace are omnivorous, and this is important. Not only do they eat bugs, but they eat periphyton algae that grows on the rocks. So there is some natural algae occurrence on these rocks. So we have a good diet match. And then finally, their community. So both the Tennessee Dace and Laurel Dace inhabit these higher order streams, primarily only found with the black-nosed dace. And so that for me, that makes me think that any interactions that I see with the Tennessee Dace can be generalized to be the same things that happen with the Laurel Dace. And this was also backed up from previous research that the Tennessee Dace and the black-nosed dace do occur together in the wild and seem to be hanging out. So I wanted to test exactly what those interactions look like. And to do that, I actually got to work at the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute, which was very exciting. In these very unique systems that they have up there. These are artificial streams. And so basically what happens is water is pumped in to this tank right here, and then it flows through this screen into this pool. And then the water just travels through this system. And these are flow-through systems, so the water keeps getting recycled back in. And the nice thing is these are completely customizable. You can change the flow, the temperature, the water level. And as you can see, I kind of designed them in a way to mimic that stream that we see on the Cumberland Plateau. So we use tile to represent bedrock, and we use boulder and cobble to represent those other substrates that we're seeing a lot of. And so on the left, you see a diagram of kind of generally what I was going for here, where we have two cameras placed in the runs of the pool. And the cameras were there to actually capture movement because both in the streams here and in the wild, the minnows tend to spend most of their time in the pools. That's where they prefer to have prefer to find food and to mate. And part of that has to do with flow. You know, you don't want to be if you were running on a treadmill constantly, you'd be really tired. And the pool allows them to kind of like relax and chill out and not have to expend so much energy. So that's a favorable habitat for them. And to look specifically at how mixed species groups might be impacting the behavior of Tennessee and in turn Laurel Dace, I gave these a few different treatments. So there were 4 of these streams at Tennessee, and each one received a different treatment. So the first one was a Tennessee Dace only stream. So there were 12 Tennessee Dace put in this stream. And as you can see, this is actually my foot right here. These are really big streams. These are like over 300 gallons. And so that's a lot of space for 12 fish, but this allowed me to actually kind of watch them. The next treatment was 12 Tennessee Dace with a caged green sunfish. So there's that predator again. And ideally, I would just let the green sunfish go and see what happens. Does it eat the fish or not? But then I'd lose my fish pretty quickly and I wouldn't have an experiment to run. So this green sunfish stayed in a cage, but the cage was cut. It had a hole cut into it and a screen placed in, and the whole thing was plastic anyway. So it allowed for both visual and olfactory cues to secrete, I guess, into the tank. And there is evidence that I'll talk about a little later that says that the fish knew that the green sunfish were there, and at some points responded kind of reflexively to attacks by that green sunfish. And the final 2 treatments were those mixed groups. So I took 6 Tennessee Dace and 6 black-nosed dace, equal numbers, and put them together. In one tank, in the mixed absent and then mixed predator present, was a 6 Tennessee, 6 black-nosed dace with that green sunfish, again, to see both how the introduction of the potential positive partner fish, that black-nosed dace, and the green sunfish impacted their behavior. And to give you a rough estimate of what I was doing, I conducted 4 rounds of this experiment. Each was 45 days long. Each fish was individually marked using something called visible implant elastomer. And this is actually an image of me injecting this into the fish. So basically, I'm tattooing a fish. A fish this big, you inject them with a fluorescent paint. And the nice thing about this is it actually allows for individual identification. So I got an entire new level of data that I was able to collect from this experiment, where not only could I just look in the stream and say, oh, they're hanging out together, oh, they're not, but I can follow individuals around. And that made this really unique. No one really looks at individual minnow behavior. So this adds a whole new level of analysis that we can do, which is super exciting. And so each fish was observed for around roughly 1 hour across the 45 days. But importantly, only the Tennessee dace were observed because they were the focal fish, and I wanted to be able to do other things and not have to worry about the black-nosed dace. So the black-nosed dace were only a treatment in the sense that I wasn't saying this black-nosed dace is hanging out with this other black-nosed dace. It was only if they were interacting with the Tennessee dace. And then finally, those cameras that were placed in the runs collected a lot of footage. So 30 hours of video footage per stream per round. So that was a lot of footage to analyze. What data collection actually looked like consisted of me hanging out on a ladder that was about 9 feet tall, and that's me above the stream. And as you can see, we allowed the streams to actually colonize with some of that periphyte and that algae that is a food source for the Tennessee dace, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And generally, what I was looking for were how their behaviors changed when presented with those different stimuli, either the friend fish, the black-nosed dace, or that potential predator. And I kind of broadly categorized these behaviors into 3 categories. Agonistic, which means negative interactions, so chasing each other, nipping, displacing. These are things that you would associate either with stressful behavior or behavior of stressed individuals, or negative interactions. I don't want to be near you. I'm going to do this to get you away from me. The other category was social interactions, and this is what I was really interested in. Were they choosing to follow each other, join each other, and associating? So were they just hanging out next to each other? And if they're within a certain distance, I took that to mean that they wanted to be there, and there was a reason that they probably hung out together. And then finally, there were a bunch of other things that these fish did, and I kind of put them as neutral. So that was traveling in between the runs, foraging, grazing that algae off the rocks, and you can actually see the result of some of the foraging right here. You can see that some of that algae has been eaten away by the Tennessee dace, or hiding, and that could be, these interactions could be negative or positive, and I kind of took those on a case-by-case basis. So if they were done with someone else, they might be positive. And just to give you an idea, this is kind of an interesting angle to see what it looks like to conduct this research, but to truly conduct at altitude, you have to be dressed appropriately. So for Halloween, I dressed up. Everyone made fun of me standing up on my mountain all the time, so I had to lean into that one a little bit. So to get kind of at what I was thinking about the potential benefits of mixed species groups, if black-nosed dace presence is actually beneficial to the Tennessee dace, then I'd expect to see a few things. And so what I have here are some of the ideas that I have, the hypotheses that I was drawing from previous observations that people had done in previous research. And then in green, I kind of have what the meaning of this is in a more general sense. So Tennessee dace that are in these mixed groups, when compared to the Tennessee dace that are just by themselves, might spend more time out in the open and move between pools more. And that kind of correlates to this idea of boldness. And if you're really bold, you're going to be able to find more food. You're going to be able to avoid predators. Like, you are interacting in a more holistic way with the environment that lets you outcompete others. And that's a good thing. And then I also thought they might exhibit more positive behaviors towards and around the black-nosed dace. That's simple. They want to be there. They think that they're good partners to hang out with. And that would mean they're less stressed. And in the natural world, stress is really bad. It makes you less successful at breeding. It makes you less successful with eating and feeding and moving, and can lead to predation or just death by other means. And then finally, to kind of get at that, I thought they would exhibit improved condition. Did they grow better? So this was, as I mentioned, each round took 45 days, and that's enough time to see a fish grow. And so did they put on weight? Did they grow in length? Or what happened? And so I'm thinking that, again, these mixed groups will, from the benefits that are provided before, will ultimately induce healthier fish. And then healthier fish just survive better in the wild. And that's really critical for the Laurel dace if we want to make sure to give them the best chance at survival. And so I'm going to go through some results here. And for those who aren't familiar with how to read these, I'm going to do my best to interpret them. But if you have any questions, please do ask. So the first thing I wanted to look at was, were Tennessee dace out more? Were they just out visible in the stream? And so what I found was that both the black-nosed dace and predator presence increased the likelihood of Tennessee dace detection. And that means when I was up on the ladder, I was more likely to see a Tennessee dace if it was in a mixed treatment than a single treatment. So as you can see here, in the single absent treatment, so this is just Tennessee dace, no predator, they were never out. They were always hiding. I rarely had any good observations of these fish. They chose to spend all their time under the rocks. And that tells me something about about their biology, that they're probably cueing in on something important that the black-nosed dace or other fish are providing. And that was evident when we compared it to the detection probability of the mixed groups. So in both the mixed absent and predator-present groups, the fish were out more. And so there's something about the black-nosed dace that's encouraging them to be bold, to be out in the environment. And despite the predator being there wasn't really a big difference, which to me was really promising, showing that, you know, if the black-nosed dace is out there with the Laurel dace, then there's a good chance that they will they'll increase their boldness and allow them to efficiently be in the habitat, even if that invasive predator is there, which we can't always control. The result that kind of surprised me was that the single species treatment, so just Tennessee dace with the predator, actually had the highest probability of detection. They were always hanging out outside, which kind of might be counterintuitive to what you'd think, because that means you're always going to be exposed to the predator. But when we actually look at what their behavior was while they were out, we could see some pretty clear patterns of what was going on. And so this graph here is showing you the average amount of time that was spent in groups of different sizes. And so the basic reading of this is that in these in the single absent group, which is kind of like the base treatment, so the Tennessee dace are just alone again, they spend a lot of their time in smaller groups of like 2, 3, 4 individuals, not choosing to they might be switching a lot in between, like who they're hanging out with, but they're not hanging out in a big group. We see the same thing in those mixed groups too, which is kind of important because that makes me think that the mixed groups, they like hanging out in these smaller aggregations. This is the baseline behavior, the normal behavior these fish have. When the Tennessee dace are alone with a predator, they spend a lot of time. All they wanted to do was be in a large group of around 8 or 9 individuals. And what that is telling me is that is an anti-predation strategy. So schooling is something fish do to avoid predators. And when you spend that much time in a giant school, you're concerned with one thing. They were not moving around. They're staying in one location, and they're all huddled together, which means they are scared. So again, this is telling me, importantly, that maybe those black-nosed dace are really important to kind of calming the fish down and bring them back down to a level where they're happy. And if you notice on the graph, the treatments with the black-nosed dace cut off around 6 individuals, and that was the number of Tennessee dace that were in that treatment. But thankfully, some further analysis showed that in both mixed treatments, around a quarter of the total time spent hanging out with any fish was with black-nosed dace, which to me indicates that they're not scared of them, they're not avoiding them at all. They were actually choosing them as partners. And another analysis that I conducted actually showed that there was no preference for a black-nosed or a Tennessee dace. So they saw each other equally, which is really surprising because you'd think this fish might be competing at least a little bit with the other species, and we'll see some evidence of that in a second. But again, this is really cool to me that the Tennessee dace saw the black-nosed and thought, okay, I want to hang out with you. So probably there's some reason that they want to be together. To get at the other prediction that I had, a really exciting result is that we did see the likelihood of positive interactions, like hanging out together, joining, or following each other, increases in mixed groups. And so when you compare across treatments, you can see that when the predator is gone, there is an increase in the likelihood of the fish hanging out together just with the mixed group. So that black-nosed dace is promoting friendship, basically. And we even see a significant result in when the predator is present too, importantly. So when that predator seems to make them want to school together, but even then that's raised even higher with the black-nosed dace. So again, those black-nosed dace are doing something important to the behavior of this fish. And another really interesting result is that these fish move a lot more. And so what this graph is showing is some of the movement data. As I mentioned, the cameras that were placed in the runs I have over hundreds of hours of footage to analyze. And actually someone here tonight, Scott Messick, is an undergrad who actually helped me run through some of these videos to actually count the number of movements of the fish in between the pools. Scott did this for a semester, and then I have another student currently working with me at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, also analyzing this footage. So this is very temporary data. This is not the final result. but what it's showing is really promising, and that's that the fish are more willing to move. The Tennessee dace are moving in between the pools more in the mixed groups, and that's really good because that means they're traversing their habitat, and in the wild, they're more likely to get to the new place, find that new food source, and maybe avoid the predators again. So this is a really promising sign that the black-nosed dace are doing something good. Finally, again, as I mentioned, we wanted to look at their condition. So after we marked the fish with that tattoo, we weighed and we measured them, and we calculated this something called the scaled mass index, and this is like fish BMI. We wanted to see how healthy the fish were. And what we found is that in the single species groups, which are the green and yellow lines, when we weighed them at the beginning and weighed them at the end, we found that they increased their condition. They got healthier, which is good. They got bigger, they got stronger, but we kind of saw the opposite when they were with the mixed groups, which isn't great. So as you can see in the mixed treatments from the start to the end of the trials, the general trend was that they decreased in their condition. They lost weight, and some of them even shrank, which is a little interesting. And I'm not going to talk too much about that now, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer that. And kind of importantly, what we saw is in those mixed groups, the black-nosed dace, which are represented by these dashed lines, did increase their condition, their BMI. They got better. And so what we think happened here is that that we artificially inflated their competition. And we only offered one food source, one really good food source in the tank, and that were bloodworms. So we fed the bloodworms every day. And it was enough for every fish to get what they needed to not only survive, but put on weight. But in the wild, when you have a stream, you have tons of food sources. So some fish might like the bugs that fall in the water. Some fish might like the bugs that live in the water. And again, the Tennessee dace may be feeding on algae and periphyton in the water as well. What we created in the tank was this system where they only had one food source that they had to compete over, and we never actually assessed the nutritional value of that algae. So we don't know whether that algae was even useful for the Tennessee dace. And while we saw them eating it, we don't know that they were actually gaining nutrients that allowed them to grow. So we don't know how well this actually represents the system. But despite the fact that the Tennessee dace kind of decreased in their condition, I do think this is an artifact of just conducting this in captivity, because this is very different than in the wild. So if we were to do this in the wild, we'd probably see a potentially different result. So the general takeaways from the research so far that I've done are that Tennessee dace in mixed groups do seem to be bolder, more exploratory, and calmer. And this is all really good news for the Laurel dace, because reintroduced fish that we ultimately want to put back in these streams that are impacted have a better chance of success if their positive partner is there too. And so the black-nosed dace has also been extirpated, is now gone from a lot of those streams that were red in the beginning. And ultimately, if we put the black-nosed dace back first, we might be providing the best possible chance of success for the Laurel dace in the future going forward. And without it, we might be missing some critical component of the biotic community that exists in these streams that promotes the success of this fish. And so the future directions more generally are to understand, again, how that parasite impacts Laurel dace behavior and survival. And I'm currently working on developing a little experiment to kind of test their behavior and see the differences when if a fish is really infected versus only slightly infected, by just kind of looking at how much they move and how they move. And then additionally to manage those two populations that are currently in human care, the Bumby and Youngs Creek, with the ultimate goal of releasing them, many of them, back into the wild. And then finally to continue cleaning up the habitat out in the stream so that we can reintroduce them effectively and provide them with the best possible chance of success. So with that, I would like to thank tons of people who all have contributed to this. Scott, who is here, that's very nice. Tonight, my advisors, Stacy and Krista, and tons of people at the Tennessee Aquarium who this work would not have been possible without. It really is a collaborative effort, and it's just wonderful to see so many people rally around this really tiny fish. So thank you again for listening to me tonight, and I will happily take any questions.
That was fascinating. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it.
Congratulations on saving the Laurel dace.
Thank you, thank you.
Questions?
I saw that whenever y'all were collecting the Laurel dace, you kind of used like a staining
Mm-hmm.
tactic, and I know I think I'm more familiar with that, like in more like I guess marine or ocean life, I guess, more shallow areas. And so like, does that become difficult
Absolutely, great question. So, so the first part, the seining is a really effective method in marine systems when you're in shallow, like sandy bottoms, because you can easily sweep along. It becomes a lot less effective in these types of streams when you have this rock and the boulder and the cobble, and fish can easily hide under them. And so either A, you break the net and the fish swim away, or you run the risk of hurting these fish. And so we actually, when I was going out collecting the Tennessee dace for my research, it ended up being this troubleshooting exercise because my fish were coming back damaged, and some of them were dying because they were. We think what was happening was they were being scraped by the net, and so there are a few options to mitigate this. One is that you turn to a completely different collection method, and if you're familiar with freshwater fish sampling at all, the other popular one is electroshocking. So if you're not, this means you're walking around with a backpack that makes you look like a Ghostbuster, and you have like you're sticking metal probes in the water and sending out a current, and you're actually stunning the fish. So they flip over. They're only temporarily stunned. You pick them up, and then you take them, and that is super effective in those streams, but can kill fish. And so we definitely don't want to do that. So that is the worst of the two options we have. So the other option was to use slightly less effective nets that were seines, but that didn't have that abrasive quality to them. So some of them are dipped in this like waxy substance to kind of increase their shelf life. We used undipped nets with slightly bigger mesh, there were twofold. So one, again, we're hopefully not abrasing the fish as much. And the other aspect is too, there were a lot of we did see some very small young of year fish that likely just got through the nets, and we wanted to not mess with them because the chances of them surviving when we take them out are pretty low. Very good questions. The seining is kind of the preferred method for endangered fish because at the end of the day, it's probably the least invasive to their biology. Yeah.
Over those 3 months of the drought, as the water was drying up,
Mm-hmm.
was there any movement downstream, or are there barriers to movement? Or
Great question. There are barriers to movement, some biotic and some abiotic. So some of the streams exist above waterfalls, and the fish are not found below that. They are the Laurel Dace and Tennessee Dace are not found sympatrically, so that means they're not found in the same streams together at the same place. But one of the things that actually separates those two fish is elevation. So Laurel Dace are only found at higher elevations, and some of that is that biotic component. Some of that we think actually is, or the abiotic component of like waterfalls and geology and the structure of the streams. But the other part is that there's a potential that the Tennessee Dace kind of outcompete the Laurel Dace at lower temperatures because they can effectively operate there, or more effectively operate there, I guess I'll say. We did check downstream at some of those sites and didn't find fish, and we're not totally sure why that is in some instances. But again, the geology of the streams is that the first thing you lose is connectivity, so it's going to be hard for them to move downstream, and they're usually going to just be relegated to these bigger pools that eventually dry up themselves. Yes?
Do you have a plan for like future droughts? It's like what if you release them next year, there's a even worse drought?
Yep. Yes, that great. Yeah. The short answer is sort of. So the plan right now. So as I said, we have these populations in human care that will remain there forever, and so that kind of safeguards against the fact that we'll completely lose them. There's constant discussion about whether this is going to happen again. And luckily, we were lucky this year, 2025, there was not a drought, so they did not have to go out and rescue fish again. But the idea is to kind of increase the stakeholder share in this. We're partnering with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with some fish hatcheries, so that they could potentially take the fish as well. So that's just a safeguard. You know, if you have an endangered species like this, you want to spread that out a little bit, because if there's like a critical system failure at the aquarium, at least there's somewhere else too. So the idea is to engage more agencies that have the capabilities to take them in the future and potentially rescue those populations. But that is all dependent on the weather and what happens in the future. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I was just curious, are the issues facing the Laurel Dace also affecting the Tennessee Dace? And what would happen if one population conflicts with the other population?
Good question. So the first part are Laurel Dace and Tennessee Dace affected by the same issues, very much so. And kind of the reason we know that this happened to the Laurel Dace, I don't want to overstate my role in this, but was that when I was going out doing my research, just trying to collect Tennessee Dace for my experiment, I found the streams in that condition. I'm like, oh shoot, and my Tennessee Dace were nowhere to be found where they should be abundant. And so it was like, oh crap, this isn't good. So we ended up running up to the Walden Ridge and actually seeing the Laurel Dace streams like that. So they are both affected by droughts. They're both affected by green sunfish. They're both affected by yellow grub too. So that was something I didn't really touch on, but the yellow grub is kind of pervasive in the environment. And one of the important differences is that Tennessee Dace are much more stable. Their population is good. They're not at risk of blinking out necessarily. They're found in a much larger range. They're found out in the Smokies, and they're protected in the national park there. So that's usually a good sign. And then your other question: what if the two populations of Laurel Dace would meet? Is that your question?
Or if, like, say the Tennessee Dace were to like go extinct, would that affect the Laurel Dace or vice versa?
I don't see a direct relationship. If one were to go extinct, it would affect the other just because they're geographically separated. That being said, because they share so many threats, like threatening factors, if one's going extinct, that's a good indication that the other one's probably not doing well. But yeah, good question. Yeah.
So what is the, I guess, critical habitat
Mhm.
been identified? I mean, and how circumscribed is that?
Good question. So there is ongoing work. So the fish was sort of only discovered because it looks a lot like another fish that lives in a similar location. Not the Tennessee Dace. They do look very similar, but to a trained ichthyologist, and even I had some trouble identifying them in the beginning. There are some important differences, but this fish looks a lot like another fish, and it was separated out in the 70s, I believe. And during that time, they ended up like doing habitat assessments, and it became listed a few decades later. And in that description, they do describe these upland streams with bedrock, with boulder. They talk a lot about the importance of riparian vegetation, and so again, that goes into like the management of that upland habitat for the stream of the fish, for the benefit of the fish. What was the second part of your?
Has it been identified? I mean, is it like within like one county or like county and a half?
It
or
is.
More extensive than
It
that?
is it's extensive that they believe that, so there are ways that you can model this, like you use computer models to identify appropriate habitat, and they combine that with historical records of this fish. So it was found in 8 streams, and those are considered critical habitat. But there are other candidate streams out there. So they're actually they're not 100% sure that they aren't other places in the wild, and so they're using environmental DNA to test that right now. So they're going to these places that are also designated critical habitat that don't seem to have Laurel Dace, collecting water, and what you can actually do is sequence DNA from the water to determine whether that fish is there. And that's how they're kind of assigning that in a broader sense. So right now it's only found in one county, essentially, but they are hopefully going to try to see if it's other places.
Are there, like, plans to try to reintroduce them to other streams?
The streams where they have been found previously, yes, and that is the ultimate goal. At this point, we're just waiting on the habitat, which we don't know how long that will take because so much of it is surrounded by private land that we can't directly say go in and like, hey, stop farming, or like protect it in some big way. Ultimately, the ideal feature, I guess, would be to put it back in all 8 streams that it was found in originally, but that's going to be a long, long way off. But right now, the idea is to release it back into so Bumby and Youngs that currently have the fish. We don't want to. If you keep fish in a population like that, you're artificially selecting for genetics that you might not even be aware of. You're not doing it on purpose, but we don't necessarily want to release all those fish back also because that might affect the genetics. And the same thing applies for releasing those fish into different streams because they are different. They are genetically different, and we don't want to ruin that one genetic lineage that's found in this stream. And so we really want to be absolutely sure that that fish does not exist in those other streams at the moment before we consider reintroducing them. Yes?
Is that grub an invasive species
It is naturally occurring in the. We don't know. The short answer is we don't know. In the streams on Walden Ridge, we think it's an invasive species. It does occur in Tennessee, but we don't think it is native to the streams the Laurel Dace is in. And again, that kind of has to do with the fact that as far as we know, and there are a lot less snail experts than there are fish experts. So if you know any that want a project, we don't know whether the snails are actually in the system themselves, and that's where the dace would be coming from, or the grub would be coming from.
Okay, so that leads to thinking, this sunfish, you said that is brought in as a fish for sport.
Yep.
Or eating. How are you, or how can you talk these people that own these ponds into choosing something else?
Yes.
Because this isn't the only thing that's affected by people fishing.
Yep.
And sport fishing and bringing in species.
That is the excellent question that I really do not have a great answer for. The Tennessee Aquarium has, I think, are really good about not going in and judging others and say, and the problem is there are no native game fish to those streams. So it's not like you could choose you can't use you can't put a bass there or anything. Anything that gets washed in from those they're not stocking the streams, they are stocking the farm ponds and they just wash in. So the tactic that the aquarium is taking is when they have these conversations to say, hey, can we do some things that might mitigate the flood of the fish into the stream? So it's not so much finding an alternative because we don't want to stop people from enjoying fishing, but making sure those fish don't, yeah. Yeah, and exactly. And so the same thing with the yellow grub that we don't think is completely native. It's coming in from those farm ponds. Can we just find a way for landowners to better manage those ponds so that there isn't unwanted spillover? Which, yeah, exactly. That's my face too. It's really hard. And we have people going out and this summer and fall, there have been people doing interviews and saying, hey, can we just get on your farm ponds? And we're actually shipping. They found snails. They've shipped them off to Auburn. We have a collaborator down there who's a parasitologist who's working on identifying to make sure we even know that this is the Clonostomum species, that specific yellow grub that has that life cycle.
One last question. Do you think the silt might be a bigger problem? And that washing, I would think that would be because even if these are invasive things that they're putting in their pond, and as a result migrating other invasive things, eventually evolution does usually take care of that.
Yep.
But the silt, there's no evolutionary drill.
Yep. Absolutely. This silt is by far the worst aspect. And like kind of my thinking with my research is, maybe just by making sure the black-nosed dace is there, we can kind of take care of the green sunfish. The black-nosed dace does not help with the silt, unfortunately, and that is the biggest concern. So we can't reintroduce this fish. We can't do a lot of things in situ in the stream until we take care of that silt. And so some ideas that have been thrown out are putting silt fences in to prevent erosion, but that's only so effective. You kind of saw, I guess, Bumby Creek, one of the first stream with the culvert. I can go back a bunch. It is an effective barrier, or it's not typically a barrier for these fish, but it could be better because. No, I'm still going back. There we go. The metal pipe does kind of extend out here, and so when the drought occurred, it drew down below the pipe, and the fish could not get upstream, and they do occur naturally both above and below. So something like that. Ideally, you would take this out and replace it with a flat-bottomed culvert that would then allow easy fish passage. And so they're even putting at this specific location, they're going to put silt fences in because a lot of that is being washed in directly from above the road. And this occurs actually on a private logging company. So there's a lot of, yes, exactly. There's a lot of land use going on that isn't necessarily ideal for the fish. Yeah. Yes. Oh. And truly, that's why, it's the grub, it's the drought. There's so many things that there are things we can control and there are things we can't. So I think taking the approach of focusing on the things we can control is the only way we're going to make any progress. Exactly. Yeah, and these fish are like, as I said, like upland streams, cold water. They need this colder high oxygenated water, and that disappears. And so. No, there are not hellbenders in. There are hellbenders in that region of Tennessee, but they are not in these streams.
But similar type environment.
Yes, they do. They both that cold, oxygen-rich water. They both need that. The hellbenders, especially because they breathe through their skin. That's like such an. And again, it's the same. All these factors that are influencing the Laurel Dace are influencing so many fish and amphibians and everything in the southeast because it's siltation. It's exactly siltation, temperature, all these things, and it's different but the same in that they all are affected, and these are the big issues that we need to solve in conserving these. Yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
I want to play devil's advocate really quick, but
Yeah.
why is it such an importance these days? For the fact of it's getting all these parasites,
Yep.
and it seems to only be in these two areas.
Yep.
So as much as we want to do it, we want to save it. It's also
Why?
Yeah.
What? This isn't a sturgeon that provides caviar. This isn't, and it's not even necessarily a charismatic animal. I have had this conversation so many times. Well, truly, I do kind of seeing the outpouring of support for this for a fish that ostensibly doesn't mean anything. That if it left, most of the people who live there wouldn't even know that it was ever there. Seeing the outpouring of support really sometimes makes me emotional. Truly, just the amount that people care about this thing, but it ultimately, if you take one stance, it doesn't matter. But the things that we talk about the aquarium are that one, the kind of the low-hanging fruit is that we caused this. This fish is endangered because of human activities, and so it's our responsibility to maintain, the biodiversity that we can and mitigate what we are doing to the environment. So it's not so much directly why this fish matters, but we should be protecting the environment. And as I mentioned, even when they're doing this outreach, it's not usually about the inherent value of a species. And there's of course so many debates on that. It's more about, well, if you want the water that you drink and the water that you recreate in to be healthy, you need to care about these streams up on the plateau, and then kind of using that fish as. It is the poster child for that, but again, it is a charismatic animal. It has a little lipstick, it's a cute little fish. But taking an indirect approach, I think, is the most effective thing. That's kind of the best answer I have for you. It's a great issue to kind of bring up when considering where to devote funds too, because you have something like a hellbender that's much more charismatic in a way, and I think people are like, whoa, giant salamander, and then you have this fish that looks like other fish, and people wouldn't really care. But if to go beyond the fact that hopefully all species have some type of inherent value, it will not impact the economy if this fish goes extinct. It will not impact people's daily lives in any way. But it's part of the environment, and that those connections that we don't know about, again the positive interactions, but even just other connections we don't know about, could have cascading effects, down the line. So, yeah.
I think exactly what you're saying. If you concentrate on the environmental aspect
Mhm.
of what it needs, you're going to save a lot of other things.
Yes. Yep.
And so it might not be exactly just the species, it's all of them that are in the same area. And if you don't necessarily know, just because we don't know everything about a specific species,
Yep.
there's often interactions that we just haven't figured out yet, and it might be very important.
Exactly, and that's my biggest argument that I make, and it's kind of the foundation for why I do, why I'm trying to apply my research to conservation, is that a single species approach, whether you talk about the environment or you just talk about saving one species, is hindering our chances of success. And so many reintroduction efforts fail because we fail to consider the connections that occur that we don't know about. And you might have something like a hellbender that probably isn't best friends with every fish in the system, but we don't know that there isn't some important interaction happening with another species. And so there are plenty of fish too that don't, like little catfish, mad toms, that are increasingly endangered, darters, and some of the fish I showed up in the beginning, that aren't as gregarious. They don't hang out together, but that isn't to say that there isn't some interaction that we don't know about. And so I think minnows are actually even though maybe they're the least charismatic of those groups, they're the easiest to conceptualize because they school together, and taking this approach where you consider species interactions as fundamental to the health of the ecosystem, I think is more effective, like when pairing that with habitat as well, when doing conservation.
Well, and I'll just add, I mean, it's even more basic than that. We have to get over our own hubris
Yep.
as a species, being man, and we have no right to remove another species from this planet just because
Yep.
it's inconvenient, and that's basically what we're talking about.
Yep.
And, I congratulate you for your work, and, I mean, it's just not our earth that can decide what
Yep.
species gets to survive and which doesn't, and it's just that basic.
Yep, I think that's very true, and again, a lot of the praise needs to again go to the Tennessee Aquarium for just their ability to reach people with that argument, and I think it is an effective argument to take, and I think fostering that appreciation in the community for everything, for the little fish, for the big salamanders, for the bugs, for the habitat itself is the way we're going to solve these issues, I think, and reaching diverse groups of people. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for this tonight.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Stick around